to the Literacy Live 2013-2014 webinar series, Balancing Prevention and Intervention. So this is our first webinar in our 2013-2014 series. I'm Laura Adams, Literacy Consultant on the Common Core team.
And I'm Barb Novak, Literacy Consultant on the Common Core team.
So we are going to be beginning this webinar series with a bird's eye view to identify needs.
You will notice some webinar tools on either side of your screen as well as the chat box. This webinar is pre-recorded, so none of those tools are available for you. However, our contact information is provided towards the end of the slideshow, and you can contact us anytime via phone or email with questions, concerns, or success stories.
So our objectives for today are to review the purpose and structure for the 2013-2014 webinar series and to review Wisconsin's state-level summative data to identify our needs. We realize that a lot of you have already engaged in that work as a part of summer data retreats, and so we realize that this may seem a little out of order since you have already done that work, but we really need to do that in order to set the context for where we are and where we're going. So the purpose and structure of our Literacy Live 2013-2014 series. As you may recall, you received a survey regarding our Literacy Live series from last school year, and we definitely took your feedback into consideration. Your feedback from the survey indicated that you found the content valuable, and many of you indicated that you would use the archived content in PLC meetings, for example. And so one of the things that we will do at the end of this webinar is show you where you can access that archived content. You also indicated that you wanted more regular reminders, which we completely understand.
And we're going to flood your inbox.
And that you wanted to see the content of the webinars go more in depth. You also indicated that viewing the webinars live was not a priority. So you will notice that our webinars this year will be pre-recorded in order to better meet our own schedule needs.
And that's not the only change that we're making to this year's webinar series because of your feedback. We're also taking a single topic and we're really taking a deep dive into it. So you'll find tremendous connections between each of the webinars. They're really meant to be viewed as a series or viewed as a set instead of several different unconnected topics.
So this year's Literacy Live webinar series will be a series of connected webinars, as Barb said, on the topic of balancing the prevention and intervention of reading difficulties. Each webinar will again be approximately 20 minutes. You'll receive an email communication as each webinar in the series is available. You'll notice that we will also be talking about specific grade bands in order to really address the needs of all of our viewers. And we will also be hearing from several district reading specialists around the state about their processes for both intervention and prevention.
You'll see this graphic in each of the episodes in this webinar series. The goal of the series as a whole is to strengthen universal instruction and intervention to ensure success for all students with grade level Common Core state standards for English language arts. Our series is going to start with intervention. A lot of people around the state are feeling a real sense of urgency around intervening with students as early as possible. So we're going to begin our webinar series by talking about intervention. Who do you intervene with? What data do you collect to determine who to intervene with? How do you structure your intervention? How do you schedule it? Besides how do you schedule it, what kind of instructional framework do you use? What resources do you rely on? And what do you intervene on? What are the topics that are covered? What are the standards that are focused on in your intervention? Then we'll move toward talking about progress. Specifically progress monitoring in intervention. How do you know students are making progress? And what do you do if they're not making progress? Which will move us into a discussion about Wisconsin's transition to a new identification process for specific learning disabilities. The second half of our webinar series, which will be published in about January, really moves to talking about universal instruction. We're referring to universal instruction as prevention because it's the best way to make sure that students don't need intervention is to strengthen your universal instruction. So again, we'll talk about who is involved in universal instruction and what structures do you have in place to meet the needs of all students. We'll talk about instructional framework, we'll talk about Common Core state standards, and that will move us into assessment, which we predict will be a very hot topic for 2014-2015.
So the goal for this particular webinar today, you can see, is to situate our learning for the 2013-2014 webinar series by reviewing state-level summative data to identify our needs. So before we do that, let's just take a minute to take a look at our timeline for the state of Wisconsin. We know that right now we are in the midst of a great transformation in education with all of the different initiatives we have that are working together in order to better support our students. So this timeline captures that and captures some of the highlights. We know that the state of Wisconsin received a waiver to be exempt from those impossible to reach expectations of No Child Left Behind. Last year we saw new report cards with new cut scores based on the NAEP scores. We know that Wisconsin adopted the Common Core state standards in 2010, and districts around the state have engaged in professional learning in order to begin to use those standards, revising curriculum, for example, taking a deep dive into understanding those standards. We know that we are also working towards that 2014-2015 school year where the Smarter Balanced Assessment will be our new state summative assessment in the areas of English language arts, reading, and mathematics. We also know that 2014-2015 is the first year of the educator effectiveness system going statewide, fully implemented statewide. Beyond that, we have a new assessment for our English language learner students in 2015-2016 with our ultimate goal of higher graduation rates using more rigorous academic standards in 2016-2017. So this graphic here represents Wisconsin's vision for all learners. So State Superintendent Evers and all of our vision, to be honest, is that every child graduates ready for future education and the workforce. And you can see that represented in the largest circle at the bottom of this graphic. So how does that relate to all of the other education initiatives that we see going on in the state? So the next circle you can see are the guiding principles for teaching and learning. And so those represent what we believe about how students learn and our best practices for teaching. The next circle represents our process for ensuring student success. That's our multi-level system of support, or RTI and PBIS. And that's establishing systems and structures in order to support all learners. Finally, in the small circle are our academic standards. At the state level, we're using the Common Core state standards for English language arts and mathematics. So none of that work is possible without the two things that are on the outside of the circle. On the left-hand side of the circle, you see stakeholder communication and engagement. We need parents. We need guardians. We need local organizations. We need community members to be informed about and engaged with the important work that we're doing in schools. On the right-hand side of the graphic, you see professional learning. Professional learning like we're doing today, professional learning like many of you work hard to collaborate and plan for in your schools every day. None of the vision of graduating every child college and career ready is possible without professional learning. Professional learning also speaks to our state system of educator effectiveness because that's the cornerstone of the educator effectiveness system. Educator effectiveness is all about honoring the good work that you already do and supporting your own professional learning to better meet the needs of all students. When we think about the Smarter assessment, we know that that's one means of measuring how our students, our proficiency level of our students at attaining those standards that we've set forth. So let's take a minute and identify our needs And so this is our bird's eye view of information that we have available to identify our needs. And one piece of information we all have access to is Wisconsin State Summative Data, the website where you can find all of this information, as well as tools to make very colorful graphs like this one, can be found at the link that's at the bottom of this slide. So this particular graph is one that you may already be familiar with, or the information contained in this graph may be information you're already familiar with. This is a snapshot of our average state-level reading data by grade level. We can see that throughout Wisconsin, from grade level to grade level, we consistently have more students scoring in the basic proficiency column. But what does this really mean?
Students on the Wisconsin Knowledge and Concepts Examination, students can perform in one of four levels: advanced, proficient, basic, or minimal. And on the graph that Laura showed you on the previous slide, you see that there's an increasing percentage of students from 3rd grade through 10th grade on our 2012 WKCE data. There are increasing percentages of students performing at the basic level. Students who perform at the basic level have partial mastery of the knowledge and skills that are fundamental for proficient work. So students who are scoring at basic on this assessment on this day are showing that they have some of the skills that they need to move towards proficiency, but that they're not quite there yet.
Knowing that the majority of our students in Wisconsin perform at the basic level should definitely be a cause of concern for all of us. When we dig further into our state-level data using the 2012 WKCE data we have available, our students' level of reading proficiency, as broken out by ethnicity, is also concerning. So this particular chart is 3rd grade student proficiency in reading broken out by ethnicity. And what we can see is that the majority of our students who have self-identified as Black and not Hispanic, and American Indian or Alaska Native scored at the minimal proficiency level. Here in 7th grade, we can see a slight improvement in the data, but again, as broken out by ethnicity, those same groups of students are still showing some great need. They're showing some definite lack of reading skills. And by 10th grade, this is where our students are ending up regarding reading proficiency, again, as broken out by ethnicity according to our 2012 WKCE results. And as you can see, again, those same groups of students are just not able to catch up from one grade level to the next. We can see some major gaps between our students who have self-identified as white and not Hispanic versus our students who have self-identified as Black and not Hispanic or American Indian. Those students are not making the same gains in reading as our students who have self-identified as white and not Hispanic. Another concerning data point that you're probably already familiar with is when we look at our levels of student reading proficiency by economic status. And so again, this chart is showing us grades 3, 6, 8, and 10, and it's showing the average reading proficiency levels broken out into two different groups. So you can see that the first group is always our economically disadvantaged students, and the second group are those students who have been identified as not economically disadvantaged. And so again, if you take a look at the 3rd grade charts, compare the 3rd grade to the 3rd grade, compare the 6th grade to the 6th grade, the 8th grade to the 8th grade, and the 10th grade to the 10th grade, we can see that our students who have been identified as economically disadvantaged, again, are really experiencing some reading challenges.
So we've looked at a couple of different subgroups. We've looked at students who are economically disadvantaged, and we've looked at several different ethnicity groups. But it's important to remember that as we're talking about categories of students, all students are working towards the same standards, and all students, the majority of students, are demonstrating proficiency on the same state level assessments. So this pie chart shows us different categories of students: early learning, bilingual or language learners, special education, gifted and talented. For each subgroup, you see different standards that those students are working towards. The common set of standards that you see for each group of students are the Common Core State Standards. In this case, the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts. You also see that each set of students is taking the same state assessment. This year, the WKCE. In the future, Smarter Balanced Assessment. So when we're talking about improving learning for students, we're really talking about improving learning for all students by a set of common standards and a common state assessment. We also, around the outside of that graphic, have instruction to remind us that what we're doing in the classroom, what you're doing, the important work that you're doing in the classroom every day is what's leading students towards proficiency on rigorous standards and assessments. Our deep dive into the data, the bird's eye view of the state level data, makes it very clear that there are a lot of students in Wisconsin who need reading intervention, that there's a real sense of urgency around providing intervention for students who desperately need it. So that brings us back to where we're starting this year, 2013-2014's webinar series. We're starting with intervention. The next webinar in this series will focus on who to intervene with and what data are you using, how are you managing that data to determine who needs intervention. And we'll hear from a couple of literacy leaders in Wisconsin who will tell the stories of what's happening in their districts. It is not enough to just focus on intervention. If we continue to focus only on intervention, we'll see the gap most likely stay the same as it is now, if not get larger. So we also need to think about prevention through high-quality universal instruction. So that's what we'll spend the majority of our time in this 2013-2014 webinar series, is talking about how to improve your universal instruction.
For some professional learning resources in the meantime, before our next webinar, you can first find our webinars that have been archived from the 2012-2013 webinar series at the address in that first bullet point. You can find additional modules for our, what we think of as our professional learning on demand modules, which can be used in PLCs or with an entire staff, for example, on a dedicated professional learning day. And you can find those resources at that link in the second bullet point. For English language arts, standards, instruction, and assessment resources, and more, follow that last link to the Read Wisconsin page. And if you haven't already checked out the resources that we have there, we definitely encourage you to do that. We feel like there are a lot of great resources there to support, again, PLC work, coaching, or for our reading teacher daily use.
And the best way to find out when we post new resources, which we're doing often, is to follow us on Twitter. If you haven't already heard us say that before, you can follow us on Twitter at @WisDPILit, and that's a place where we tweet out great news about literacy. We curate some resources from other places, but we also definitely tweet whenever we release or update an existing resource.
So thanks for joining us today. Here is our contact information. So please, again, feel free to contact us anytime with questions, concerns, if you're looking for something and can't seem to find it, or to share success stories. We're definitely also interested in those. We like to hear good news, always.
So thank you for the great work that you're doing, and we're so glad that you joined us today, and we look forward to future webinars.